Hello, welcome to my week 8 assignment for a separate presentation for stakeholders concerning the insurance industry. This is a presentation for TIM 7101, Managing Risk, Security, and Privacy in Information Systems, and I will get right into it. Thank you for being here with me this evening. Moving forward, the business case, the outline, if you will, will revolve around a simple set of steps for the strategic plan to occur. This is the business case, the technical case, objectives, goals, gathering relevant data, implementation, and monitoring. And the reason for this is the initial organizational strategy and pilot project revolved around a single null hypothesis, which was removing the human aspect from the insurance sales process would reduce fraud. This showed some interesting impacts. More so that wasn't always the case. And so moving forward, human elements could include things like location, income, size of the family, things that agents may not always get right or be aware of, or things that the client or prospect may say erroneously or deviously. So moving forward, it was more about finding confounding variables that technology can help fill the gaps to reduce the aspect of fraud and detect it when present. The business case will revolve around, risk awareness for stakeholders, for centric project management, and policyholder motivations. And so what we're really looking at here is being able to have a clear, concise means for who's getting what. Our stakeholders want to make sure that the business is appropriate. The project management wants to make sure that things can be handled in a clear, concise manner. And policyholders want to make sure we're compliant with, AI regulations, data regulations and everything of that, making sure that the information is safe. And so with that, we need to take a risk-centric project management approach that will basically look at every step of the sales process and make sure that where fraud can be detected or eliminated, we are doing our best to use technology in a responsible way to address that. Second aspect of the business case is the human element of fraud. It may not always be a devious means to detect fraud. Sometimes this may be a lack of expertise on the agent's part. This may be a bigger issue where the branch operations have been so complacent for so long that they are just falling behind. There's a lot of factors here, but more so negative attributes in statistical models will hurt the process if they're not addressed. Outliners may appear impactful if we don't know what those outliners are, if they're not studied and analyzed properly. And so moving forward, that is what we're really looking for, is how to find outliners and confounding variables and turn those into gaining and meaningful insights. Technical case mirrors the business case in that we want purposeful technological implementations. We just don't want to insert tech for the sake of inserting tech. So this means balancing skill with time, and also making sure that our team has time to learn these new methodologies as well as become intimately known data sets they're working with. This will also help with, transparency and with investigators when dealing with fraud. So if we know what we're looking at, this is a boon for our organization. That shows that we've done our due diligence to make sure that we're not just slapping on the latest statistical model, that we're using this with a purpose. Budget considerations and time curve in this revolves around, do we have the time to actually do this? This should be an integrative approach, so this is something that we should be doing on a regular basis. That means we need to know if we're removing a human element versus fraud detection. Boils down to, if removing a human element is going to reduce fraud, that's great. But if that's not the case, the technology we are implementing should be useful for fraud detection, or we're just adding tech for the sake of entering it. So the impact will be later gauged against expected outcomes. So removing the human element in this instance, just resembles the simple act of adding an email check via a bot in our app. The bot will trigger the automation, and whenever a user updates, deletes, or adds any data, this will trigger an email to be sent to the app owner. So this is the first step in creating our data model, if you will. So for ease of use, we will be using the Google App Maker in Google Sheets. This will generate our email trigger. And the central idea behind here is that offers a wide variety of tools that is open source and free and easy to use. So this helps with the the learning time curve for our developers, and it's also easy to represent to management as well. So already we have a quick way of getting insights and doing work without a lot of overhead. This will send a trigger to the management email account, which then gets scrubbed again. The updated records get scrubbed again to go into a new data set, which can be used for comparison purposes. The cloud function that does this takes the HTTP request and then triggers or writes the codes to Google Sheets to deploy the function. And then if you look at these screenshot to the right, the email body contains variables such as the customer ID, the state, the customer lifetime value, where they went to school, or sorry, what level of education they have, if they're married, the size of their car, their income. That way, anything that's changed, we can then evaluate that against prior updates in that table to make sure that there's no outliners or impactful variables that seem out of place or odd. And also we can assign responsibility to agents, our management, our developers that make these changes. The goals here, as stated earlier, revolve around developing a data model so machine learning can, occur naturally. That way, that feature engineering is impactful and intentional. We're not just, once again, adding emerging tech for the sake of adding emerging tech. And this goes into implementing anomaly detection, which basically revolves around the difference between outliners and confounding variables. We want to know why these are outliners, not just that they are and that they should be observed. We want to observe them with a purpose. That way, when network analysis does occur on the IT side of things, we actually know when is the proper time to conduct this, when are these outliners most likely to happen, and what to look out for. And this extends the visibility into our app and adds credibility to our organization, so that way the data is scrubbed and any anomalies are addressed. The last step for the goals is actually making sure that we've met these goals. And so predictive modeling and data validation and cleaning go into building a continuous model, which we'll get into, implementation and monitoring here later. But more so, we want to collaborate with domain experts. And this is best done when predictive modeling is insightful. We just don't want to have predictions just for the sake of monetary gain. We want to make sure that trends we're observing are insightful to the client as well. AI for Good states that it should be fair. So if we're seeing a trend where, for example, some users may not want to utilize some features, legacy devices, if they're older perhaps, or if they're just may not be able to afford the newest smartphone or laptop, we want to make sure that we can account for that and not just assume something. We want to make sure that we are aware of this, and that's what I mean by continuous model improvement will of course account for this as well. When we are gathering the data, for instance, any internal data needs to be properly accounted for. So policy data, claims data, customer data, transaction data, behavioral data, all of this needs to be seen through a scope and protected. That's the main issue here. So anything that we have needs to be encrypted, and that way when we share it with third parties, it's compliant. Meaning that anything we use, there's someone out there, if it's not encrypted, who can use it just to view our data plainly. So if we are not encrypting our data, anyone who can download Burp Suite can see our network traffic and easily insert cross-site scripting or remote execution if passwords are available. So we definitely want to look for that, and definitely behaviors that could replicate that. So we want to make sure that we're aware of this. The other side of that spectrum, we have external data. So while it may be prudent for an agent to say, look at the public records of a prospect concerning DUIs for auto insurance, that would be something of interest, definitely. It may not be so more accurate to look at their social media, and if they have Instagram or Facebook and say they have videos of them making cocktails, or they're posting a lot of pictures of different liquor, to assume that they're an irresponsible driver. Maybe it could just be that this person's a professional bartender, or they may have brand endorsements with that particular brand of liquor. So you don't want to incorporate bias. This is what I mean by removing the human element when appropriate. However, this also bleeds into data enrichment. So we want to have insightful data. We want to make sure that anything that we're adding is for the sake of data enrichment, not just for the sake of, you know, um, making ourselves feel better or making sure we're not putting on the right people. Then implementation wise, this is what I meant by going back and making sure that everything we gather is appropriate for implementation. We need to allocate resources to the proper teams, whether that's management, data analysts, or programmers. And we need to make sure they have the time to do training and construct educational materials for themselves and future employees. So this helps build our use case. And with those two in the cycle, it contributes to the other side where monitoring happens. But more so here, we need to make sure that anything can be explained to C-level staff. That way, the process of the strategic life cycle will iterate again when new data is introduced and or the model improves and changes. And moving forward with the last step of that, monitoring occurs when we can actually compare performance to goals. This is what I meant earlier when I was saying we just don't want to implement technology for the sake of it. We want to have a clear goal in mind so that when we hit performance marks, we can see if we achieve those goals. That way we can monitor progress accurately and attentively. And then data collection and analysis occurs when we can get appropriate data that is scrubbed, that is cleaned. That way when we allocate resources again, we know exactly where that data will be used best. Therefore, the training education materials that come in future iterations will be more robust and not just iterative or redundant, or we won't just be having, the same insights but with a different date. It will be actually useful and powerful, and it will actually expand the model that we'll use. And new statistical models can then be attributed appropriately. So to wrap this up, what we are saying is that within an insurance agency or industry, there's a lot going on, and continuous improvement is the goal of the strategic plan. However, technology should only be applied when it is warranted, when it is ethnically viable, when it is useful to the organization and the client. We shouldn't just do it just to say that we are cutting edge or benchmarked. We should be utilizing it and in a responsible, appropriate manner. And the aspect of removing the human element, like I said, to not allow AI-induced unemployment, but more so to help us answer our null hypothesis that requires an iterative approach to data modeling. That way, in future iterations of the model, we know the outliners, what they mean, how they've come to be, and then how we could use them to our advantage instead of looking at them as caveats or confounding variables. And thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.